My name is Tonia Weaver, and I am an employability consultant in the careers team. One of many of your careers team here ready to help you whenever you need it. So today I'm going to be concentrating on interview skills for undergraduate positions. I've sort of focused a bit on graduate roles, but most of this information is for any kind of formal interview. Okay, you're more than welcome, happy if you want to put up chat questions as I go through. There'll be plenty of time to be asking questions. I like to get a bit of feedback from my audience to know that you're there, just to tailor it to specific things that you want to know about. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to be flexible. So I guess the first thing that I'd like to know from the audience is who has had a formal interview before? No answers. All right, so formal interview, by that I mean is that you're sitting down, you have one or two people, usually you have two people in an interview. For the university and other organisations, they might have a panel interview of 3 people. And it can be quite intimidating. The purpose of this is to go through so it's not as intimidating, that you can prepare yourself and you also know what to expect. Before I get into the presentation, just to note that Hugh has put up a link there. That is our, if you wouldn't mind clicking on that, that's on stage, and just putting in your student number, and that's registering your attendance today. That would be really helpful. So a standard format for a professional kind of interview, you'll know whether, the rule of thumb to know whether or not it's going to be formal or not is that there's a HR department in the organisation. So it's a medium to large organisation with a HR department. So then they're going through with best practice. It's a fair and equitable process. There's rules. There's people have been trained in how to do an interview. So that's the rule of thumb. If in doubt, always ask the interviewer or the admin person or whoever's organising the interview more details. Is this, how many people are going to be in the interview? What are their names? What are their job titles? All those sorts of things. But it helps you to prepare. It's also a good opportunity for you to hop on LinkedIn and look up those people. That's quite fine. It's a professional thing to do, to be showing your enthusiasm and preparing. And you might find that one of those employees or hirers is linked to you somehow. Even if you're not linked to them, then you can certainly see what they look like and get a little bit of an understanding of what their role is, how long have they been at that organisation, and so on. And I don't know if you've experienced this before, but if you read something about someone in that space, in that virtual world, then when you do get to meet them, whether it's virtually on Zoom or Collaborate, or if it's in person, it's actually a bit more comfortable. You do feel that there's a bit more of a connection. I don't know how that works, but just what I've experienced, and I've had that feedback from many people as well. So standard format. The standard format of a well-run interview is, to start with, is the introductions. And if there's 3 people and you've got their names beforehand and you'd look them up on LinkedIn, then it's 3 things less to remember. All right, that you can remember those 3 people's first names. Then it's the role of the hirers, the interviewers, to make you feel comfortable. They're not there to make you feel uncomfortable. So they'll usually have a little icebreaker question. Just, how's the weather today? Did you have trouble parking? Just that sort of icebreaker kind of, just to help you get comfortable. Offer you a glass of water. Always say yes to the water, and I'll mention that and show you a trick and why you'd want a glass of water. All right. Then they would go through and talk about the information and give you a bit of a blurb about the organisation or the company that they work for. So, because remember that they're there to sell you the job as much as you're there to sell yourself for the position. Then they'll normally would go through the team that the position would sit in, who that position would report to, and then go into a bit more detail about the role itself. Then once they've done that, they would then start asking you questions. The first question I'm going to go into a bit of detail today is usually very open-ended, and it's that old, tell us about yourself. All right? And so that's a way to, give you a question that you can obviously answer easily. It's not going to be technically difficult, but to understand that you're warming up. Then they'll go into a body of questions. They'll go through a number of questions. Now, the questions they ask you will be exactly the same as every other candidate. And the thing to note about this is that the questions they're going to ask you are most likely going to be based on the information that was given to you in the position description or the job ad. That's the requirements for you to apply for that role, or the selection criteria they gave for you to apply for that role. So that's what you're going to focus on when you're preparing your answers. Then at the end of the interview, they usually will give you an opportunity if you have any questions. If you've got any have you got any questions for us? Always ask a couple of questions, and I'll go into detail again through a bit later in our presentation today. Any questions just about that basic format? It's another quiet crowd, Hugh. Remember, you can put things in the chat box, and I won't reveal your name, all right, because it's being recorded, and so I won't do that. All right, thank you. I've got an all good from one of the Ken students. All good. I'm making sense so far. Well, that's some good feedback. That's nice to know. Right now, the purpose of the interview. There's three things, and every single interviewer want to know this. Every single hirer want to know these three things. It doesn't matter what level that you're going for, whether it's a customer service front counter job at McDonald's, to a graduate position, to a PhD candidate going for a research position in academia. The three things are: 1, can you do the job? 2, will you fit in? And 3, will you do the job? And will you do the job well? They're the three things that any hirer want to know. Out of those three, which of them do you think is the most important to a hirer? Guesses? Great. So one of the someone said 2. Will you fit in? That's important. Yep. Any other guesses? The most important. 3. Fantastic. Will you do the job? Will you do the job well? Okay. So you're right. It's the 3rd. Will you do the job? Will you do the job well? This tells us that and this is what they're finding out through the interview. Will you do the job? Do you really want this job? Are you enthusiastic? Are you motivated? Because if you are motivated and you really want this job and you have that enthusiasm, then whatever there's always going to be a skills gap. There's always things to learn in a brand new job. You've got to learn about the culture, and there'll be maybe some technical things, and ongoing learning, learning about the team, learning about the hierarchy, all those sorts of things. If you're enthusiastic and motivated, you will learn those. And with the first question, that can you do the job, they already know that you can do the job from what you've given them on your resume. You're about to finish a degree or you're in the middle of your degree, they know that you're clever. They know that there's things within there that they can they'll go through, and of course then they'll always be checking with your referees to ensure that and your qualifications and things later, so they know definitely you can do the job. So that's all sort of the paperwork and the admin side. But in the interview, will you do the job? Your enthusiasm, the types of questions you ask, your answers, and all those sorts of things, your body language, that's getting across your enthusiasm and motivation. It is the most important thing that any hirer wants in a candidate and their employees. The other thing is then that fits into number 2, the will you fit in. So number 2 is really the second most important. If you are enthusiastic, motivated, and have the right attitude, you will learn about the culture within that organisation and the people and what they like and dislike and what communication style your manager likes best, and work out how to fit in. Now, of course, we don't want to be cookie cutters, but it's just about getting along with people. People want to work with people that they like. You know, they don't have to be buddies or go out for beers or be friends or anything, but colleagues, having that collegial, friendly atmosphere. So when they come into work, they want to go into work. And as a team leader or a manager, the amount of time that can be spent on performance managing issues between people, and it is so time consuming and so draining. I know from experience. I've gone down that path earlier in my career and steered back into more of a specialist role. It's not for me. All right, so those 3 things, keep in mind. So when you're in the interview, you're getting across, will you fit in, will you do the job, the enthusiasm and motivation. Okay, questions. So the first thing we do to prepare is to go back through the advertised position description, go through your documents that you've submitted for that role. Now, just an aside here, when you apply for a role that's on Seek or online, always save a copy somewhere, because when you're once that job's closed, then that goes off the website. You want to see everything about that position, that in the case that you get an interview, because you want to go back to that document. So the questions are most likely going to be based around the selection criteria or requirements. All right, so that's the requirements in order for you to apply. It's not so much about the responsibilities and the key tasks of what you will do once you get the job. By all means, if you have those skills and experience, then keep those in mind. But the thing that they're critiquing is the requirements in order to apply for the role. So this is the opportunity that you're going to get across to show how you meet those requirements. They're generally open-ended questions, and they're going to be relevant to that role, and they're going to be relevant at the same level. So if we're talking about a graduate role, then they'll be asking sort of questions and things based on that level. The other thing is here, remember that the last part of this is of the meeting will be that you prepare some questions to ask them. So some of those questions that you could be asking them, it might be about the organisation, it might be about some projects or some investment that you've seen, that you've researched online, whether it's on their LinkedIn, on their website, or some other social media or the media. Make sure that you do your research about that. It might be about the team who you report to. It's always, as a rule of thumb, if they don't cover it, check when they're going to make a decision and when they'll let you know by. Because if they tell you that they're going to let you know by Thursday afternoon, that whether you've been successful or not, then you know that Friday morning you would ring them to follow up to find out the decision. All right. And if it's Friday afternoon, then by all means, if it's late Friday afternoon, when they said, give them a call late Friday afternoon, don't stew over it over the weekend. So it's showing that will you do the job, that enthusiasm, that you're really keen. They said they would get back. Now, what often happens is people are sick. People the decision makers haven't signed off a piece of paper. So it can be as simple as that. So you may not get the answer, but then they can say, look, we're really sorry. This is what's happened. We'll get back to you on Wednesday next week. Right? Something similar to that. Tell me about yourself. Has anyone been in an interview and they've been asked this question? Quite fun.
Pretty much every interview I've ever been in, I think they've opened with that one.
Great. Thank you very much, Hugh. Fantastic. And I would have to say the same. So tell me about yourself is the number one first question that most hirers will open with. And when I go through, my team members go through mock interviews with students, they all cringe. Oh, I hate this question. Well, prepare it, because it's really going to help you, and you certainly want to be really prepared for that first question, because we're all most nervous then, and you're still building that rapport and getting comfortable. Now, it's the most common first question, because I know being when I've been a hiring manager myself, is I've gone through the culling process. I've got down to my best 6 candidates. I would have done that maybe a week or 2 before. Then all the interviews have been organised, and then might be there are 5 candidates that you're recruiting, interviewing virtually back to back in a day sometimes. Right? So by asking that tell me about yourself question from the hirer's point of view, it's reminding them of who you are. Oh, that's right, the University of Newcastle, the candidate that's got the really strong customer service background that we're looking for. Right? Then, and so that's why it's a really popular first question. The hirer is asking about your professional, working, employable self. They're not asking about your hobbies, where you grew up, what your background is, those sorts of things. It's all about your career, working life, employable self. If you think it's important that you tell them for a reason, say if you were going to, say we've got some students that they're going through their education interviews soon. So if they're going for a position in a rural area and they come from a rural town, then it makes sense for them in that first question to tell them, I grew up in the rural town of so-and-so, there's only this many people, that's what I really enjoy, because that makes sense and it is relevant to the position they're going for. I know definitely when I returned back from Sydney to Newcastle, when I was getting interviewed once I returned, I was always, it's not so much now, but 15 years ago, Newcastle was still fairly parochial in some sense. I would always say I was born and bred in Newcastle. I did my degree at Newcastle University. I left and went to Sydney in my early 20s, okay? All right, so I've got a question here. What if it's our first job interview? Okay, so I'm not quite sure what, could you just clarify a bit more? What do you mean? All right, have a think about what it, so if it's in relation to the tell me about yourself, yeah, sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean. If it's your first job interview, you'll be doing lots of preparation and it does get better, it gets easier, all right? And I'll talk about some tips and tricks about nerves as well, if that's what it's linked into. Now, the tell me about yourself, of course, they may not ask that question. But even if this question's not asked, I always ask students to prepare for this because it's a way to prepare for similar questions. So they might ask, why should we hire you? What do you think you have that other candidates wouldn't? Right? Why should we pick you kind of question. So it can be used and phrased in a lot of different ways. Okay. All right. So if it's your first job interview, how will we tell our professional self because we haven't done any job before? Okay. Anywhere before. Great. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. All right. So what you'll know then with what you're really doing is going through your resume. And in your, as far as your experience, okay, so you may not have started your profession, which is fair enough, that's you're right, but you've had a number of different experiences. You may have done some customer service work, you might have worked in retail, you might have been doing some volunteer work at the university. Internships, perfect, absolutely. If you've done internships, you're going to be talking to them about that. A number of, yeah, and a number of, let's say, engineering and in courses, there's internships, there's work integrated learning, and there's also going to be much more of that. There's a big focus and a big push on work integrated learning and opportunities for that's coming. That's a big push from the VC, which is fantastic. Well, careers are really excited about that. Okay, so tell me about yourself. Now, the other thing too is when you go through and think about, right, I've got all this, I've got these experiences. Oh yeah, I've got that team project that I did with RoboGals when we built that robot and it was under pressure and it was a project and we worked in a team. Oh, I didn't even think about that one. And then you go through what your education and those and the different skill sets that you have. Even if they don't ask a question that's related to that, it really helps you boost your confidence. It really helps you also consolidate all the things and focus all the things that you've got to offer this organisation for this particular role. When you're preparing, people say how long, I just say, look, it's approximately, it's at least 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds. This is approximate because, of course, what you're going to be doing is watching their body language. I know it's a bit harder when it's on Zoom, but still, just play it by ear, right? And the thing that I hope that you're all going to do is before your next interview, you're going to go back to these slides, have a look at our resources that I'm going to show you, and book in for 2 mock interviews at least before the interview. And then you can go through and with myself or one of the team members, and we'll critique you on your answers. and then you can come back and do it again, all right? We do it one-on-one. We don't do it in an open space. We do it in a very safe and very comfortable environment. And I don't know why, but some students come back and say, oh, the interview was much easier than the one with you, Tonia. I was more nervous when I sat down with you. Well, that's fine, because I'm not the one there that's going to make that decision, but that's the point of it, okay? And not that I'm trying to be scary or anything, but that's you wanting to get the job. Okay. Now, the last bit of this, people say, well, what am I going to say in this? So I mentioned before, you're really good at regurgitating what you've got in your resume. It's always easier to have a structure to follow. One of the structures that I find personally, and many students like to follow, is to go through chronologically. So imagine is that you've met, someone in 10 years' time, you meet someone from uni, you're having a beer at the pub, and they say, so you're really good at C++. Remember when we were robo-gals together and we built that robot? What have you been doing with yourself in your career? All right. So when we go through and we're talking to a friend or old colleague, it's natural to say go through in a chronological way. So you could go through that way. So it's like that education student I mentioned. They grew up in a rural country town, so-and-so. I then moved to Newcastle to do my bachelor degree in teaching primary, and then I did this placement. My placement was at this school. Then from that, I then went on and did my second placement at so-and-so school. In the meantime, whilst I was there, I was doing some volunteer work, doing some mentoring with the migrant school children over in Hamilton in the so-and-so organisation. A little bit later, during school holidays, I was an educator in the after school, in the vacation care, and I built up my skills in that environment, dealing with different kinds of school children and different ages. Okay, and then so you're just going through that, and see, look, I'm just talking off the top and making this all up, and I'm sort of making, well, it sounds like I'm making sense, right? And then as I finish, then I end on my last placement, my last education placement, which is the one that's been the most involved, I've had the most responsibility, and it's most recent. All right? So practice and work out what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And that is one of the questions that we'll ask you at a mock interview every time. Well, that's what I suggest to my teammates. We do have a bit of a flavour, but that is generally what we will get you to practice. Right, tell me about yourself. Reminder about that, you don't tell them about married, children, if you live, where you live, if that's not relevant, okay? So any of those things that you can be either unlawfully discriminated against, like being married, having young children, you may not even be the primary carer, but they don't know that. So you don't mention it. These things used to be on the top of a resume when I was in the 80s, when I was going for roles, okay? And there's a really good reason why they're not there now. Do not mention them. If you mention them, you're giving them information and they can make a decision, and you don't know if it was discrimination or not based on those things. Leave them out. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. When you're giving your answers, and keep in mind that you're giving answers and examples of experience that are going to be most recent. You're going to give them recent because it's really fresh in your mind, so you can go through a lot of detail. You're going to give examples that are most similar between the job role that you're going for and your experiences. So, for example, if it was about working in a team, the teaching student that I've been making up as I go along would be talking about the team that she worked in at the vacation care as an educator, working in that team, before she talked about working in a team at McDonald's. So that's what I mean about the similarity. Then the last thing is about relevance, is pitch it to the context. So it's a bit similar to the one before, but the same level of the job. Okay, so an educator at an USH, an out of school hours vacation care, is not the same level as a graduate, is not the same role, or not the same professional responsibility as a final year placement student working in the school. So when it's talking about some of those teaching principles and things, then this student would be focusing on the placement examples to get that across. By all means, could still be using that USH after school care educator role and the mentoring role for other examples, but just keep that in mind. And the reason I'm talking about these examples is because I'm now going to go into what's best practice with organisations in formal interviews, and that is using behavioural interview questions. Has anyone heard of behavioural interviewing or behavioural questions? Okay, so someone got one answer. No, haven't heard of behavioural questions. So you may not know it by that name. So an example of this would be, tell me about a time when you've been in a high pressure environment, working in a team. How did you contribute to that team in order for a positive result? Right, so give me an example. Tell me about a time. Demonstrate. So it's very much like the selection criteria you see that are written in many of our jobs on campus roles, right? And the reason why they're there is to help you practice and understand how to do these kinds of answers and these kinds of behavioural interview questions. So with behavioural questions, just like selection criteria, if you have to write out response to selection criteria documents, which you do in our Jobs on Campus campaigns, for and that's because you're applying for roles within the university, roles within government organisations, local, state, federal government organisations, all health, all of those things. So what the selection criteria is, demonstrate how you meet your high attention to detail or your team building, skills, all right? That's what you do in writing, when you're writing that response to selection criteria. For many roles, thank goodness, in the private sector and industry, they normally will ask for just a resume, maybe a cover letter, all right? But the advantage of having spent a lot of time in writing that response to selection criteria, if it's required, is that what you're actually doing is preparing your answers for if and when you are successful getting into the interview. So when we answer a selection criteria, or in this case, this behavioural interview question, we are going to use the STAR response. Now, who hasn't heard of the STAR response? Who hasn't heard of the STAR response? Great, okay. So you may have come across this with writing selection criteria, okay? So STAR. The STAR is an acronym. You might have heard of CAR, SAR, there's SAO is another acronym. They're the same, it's the same type, it's the same thing, just slightly different, same but different, right? So S is the situation, you're setting the scene. The T is the task that you did. The A is the actions that you did. The R is the result of that example. Right, so what you're going to do then is anticipate the questions like I mentioned before. You're most likely going to be asked the behavioural questions based on the requirements for the role and the or selection criteria, depending what terms they're using. So you're going to have a STAR for every behaviour that you see in that document. Teamwork, attention to detail, organisational skills, those sorts of things, those sorts of professional behaviours. Then you're going to prepare answers. Now, the STAR, going into a bit of detail, the S, the situation. So that is where you were working or the volunteer role, the organisation, the job title, and approximately when. That's the big high-level context. The task, it's the task, or it could be a project, or it could be a customer, or it could be the team, right? So it is just setting the next part of the context. So if it's, you know, high-level working, tell me about a time when you've worked well in a team. How did you contribute to that team in order to have a successful outcome? So when you go into the T, you're going to be talking about, say, my RoboGals project and the team I was in with 4 other women. There was 3 that were engineering students, 1 was IT, and I was the 5th person. Right? That's setting the context. Brief, really brief, because what you'll notice when you get a bit more relaxed and with more practice is that your hirers aren't writing down yet, or might only be jotting down a little bit what you're saying until you get into actions. And this is where you're explaining what you did. Now, you're the one that's being interviewed, so what you're going to be using is I said, I then, I continue, I discussed with the team. I suggested to the team that we meet together face-to-face and then catch up with weekly Zoom meetings. I set up the Zoom meetings, all right? So even when it's a team question, keep in mind to use the I, first person singular, all right? And now so that's the sorts of things that you're going to work on to prepare what you're going to say. Okay. Now, the next thing I want you to think about is your verb, your communication, the way that you communicate. Because remember what the main thing is that the hirer is looking for here. They're looking for the point 3. Will you do the job? Will you do the job well? Are you really keen? Are you really motivated? So it's not so much about, you know, it is about the words that you say, and that's what you're going to practice and have a think through. And it is about, you know, the best example, and you're going to prepare that before you get in there. But the thing that you need to also prepare is your body language, your tone of voice, your eye contact. And I'm going to talk about that in the context also today when you're doing a virtual interview via Zoom as well, and some tricks for that. So out of all the elements of communication, when we're getting across who we are in a conversation and in an interview, there's 3 ways that we communicate. There's words, there's tone of voice, and there's body language. Out of those three, what do you think is the most important if you had to choose one? I mean, they're all important. It's a whole package. Out of those three, is it words you say, your voice, the tone of your voice, or your body language? Guesses? No guesses. All right. Well, I'm going to tell you. Body language? Yes, you're right. Got it in just as I put it up there. Body language. Because if my body language is sort of like this, going, oh yeah, I really, the job sounds really good. I'd really like, yeah, the whole demeanor, it doesn't, what your body is saying and projecting is not what you're saying. Then the next one is the tone of voice. So the tone of voice can be really dull. We can be sarcastic and say exactly the opposite of the words we're saying, okay? And the spoken word is about 7%. So this is Albert Moravian, the Professor Emeritus of it's psychology. So UCLA, he did this research many years ago. The idea of this is that in the interview, you've got to have the whole package. But what many people will do is they'll write down what they're going to say, go, yeah, I've got some really good examples. They're really relevant, and I've got some great experience. But what they don't do is practice saying it. So it's just like when you're doing when you do presentations, which is great that many of you get to do that during your degree, because until you actually stand up and speak it, then you work out where do you put the pauses, where can you put the emphasis, how do you engage your audience, what body language is going to be is going to be natural and what's going to be too much. So I remember coaching a senior engineer many years ago outside of university, a different role altogether, coaching him in the interviewing, and he came from a Italian background, which he was very proud of, and so he should. And he was very articulate with his hands, and he was very enthusiastic. And the first mock interview, I got him to sit on his hands, not to take away that authenticity and his personality, but he was overdoing it because he was nervous, right? So it was quite funny. He sat on his hands and he was squirming around. So then the second time when he came in, he was able to still use that personality, still use that lovely, that flavour from his Italian self, but in a much more professional and restrained way. Okay, so spoken words. This is the elements of communication online. So when you're doing an interview online, you've got your spoken words, of course, the tone and your body language. So again, just you're keeping in mind with body language is that they can only see from really, the chest area up, all right? So if you're going to use body language, just keep that in mind. Try and smile as much as you can. And the eye contact is a really interesting thing with an interview. When I was talking to Hugh before, you might have seen my eyes were actually down, and I was looking at him on the screen because his little icon was down here. But whilst I've been talking to you today, I've been really concentrating on where my camera is. So one of the tricks until you get used to is have some arrows or some sticky notes sitting up the top of your laptop or your PC, whatever device you're using, with arrows to say, look here, look here, look here, look here, all right? Even though the people's faces are down here further, because on the virtual world, if you're not looking straight at the camera, it doesn't look like you're looking at their eyes. Okay, so something to keep in mind and something to practice. Of course, then it's also about this communication. You need to make sure that the audio quality is really clear, your own. So always be wearing a headset or check everything and minimize any background noise. Also, you're going to check about your visual quality, your own and your background. So take note of what's behind you. All right, don't have, if you are sitting in your bedroom, you close the wardrobe doors. You don't have all your dirty clothes flung everywhere. For many people on Zoom, like depending on version, you can put up your own background. Not a Hawaiian scene of cocktails on the beach, a professional one. Unless you're going for a job in that environment, of course. All right, lucky you. Keeping my eye on the time. So your verbal presence. Don't read your answers, please. You can tell it's boring. All right? We all know when someone's reading a speech, ho-hum. Remember, this is about engaging with the people. They want to know how you communicate. It is the number one thing, criteria, a requirement for any job. It's the highest on the list of employability, because if you can't communicate with your manager, with your team members, with your customers, with your clients, then that's something you need to work on. All right? Don't read your answers. Practice speaking about yourself. You want to come across being passionate, enthusiastic, captivating, authentic, comfortable, right? It doesn't matter if you're nervous and you don't come across as comfortable and confident, but that's what you're aiming for. Having nerves is human. They want to work with a human, right? And the fact that if you are experiencing nerves and you're showing it, it also shows that you really want this job. Because the people that don't come across a little bit nervous or a bit edgy, as a hirer, you think, oh, they don't look like they're really enthusiastic and want this job. Keep that in mind, all right? Virtual handshake. So just keep in mind your posture, facial expressions, your grooming, all of those things is you're going to be dressed for the interview, your hair, everything is going to look like the people on the other side of the Zoom in the virtual world. There's a link there that you can have a look at later about how to master a job interview over Zoom with some more tips. Always check your tech. I know it seems really obvious, but check it, practice it. If it's via Skype or say in the health, Hunter New England Health, they don't use Zoom because it hasn't got the same amount of security. They use a different system. So practice it before you're there. So I've mentioned a couple of those things before. Camera above eye level, sticky notes at your camera, adjust the lighting. So that little picture to the right there is my home office in the middle of COVID last year to show what I was doing with my laptop to try and prop up the camera above my eye level. Now, do what I say, not as I do, because today I didn't. So this is how it would look if it was a bit higher. Now, why we're doing that, why we ask that, it's a tip, because it's the same as when you're doing your selfies, is you don't want your double chin, right? And there's the lighting is better when you're looking up as well. You want the light to be in front of you, so the most light to be behind the laptop, or see where the window is there. The window is in front. Again, do what I say, not as I do, because I'm in a different office today. The window's behind me, right? Now, these tips I got from a TV professional, and there's a little YouTube clip there if you want to have watch her tips there. It's not very long, but I found that really useful. Oh, stop. It just went really slow then, so I've just gone through a couple of slides. Right, let me try again. Dealing with nerves. All right, so I've mentioned before a little bit about having nerves is performance anxiety. It means you want the job. You're not being there, you're not being critiqued on how nervous you are, but you don't want to be so nervous that you can't answer the questions or you can't think properly, right? Some people can come across, they can be really slick in an interview, and the feeling from the hirers on the other side is they just answered the answers by rote. There was something that just wasn't quite right. It didn't come across as genuine or authentic. Okay, so you don't want to be like that. You want them to get to know you, your professional self. Deep breathing. Okay, so you're going to do a few deep breaths before you start. I mentioned about having the glass of water. Now, if I'm getting asked a question, it's going to be a STAR question. Tell me about a time when you've been in a high pressure situation. What did you do? Right, I'm going through my filing cabinet of my STAR answers. What's going to be the best one to say? Thinking. Okay, so one of the examples is, all right, so it's a delay tactic, right? The positive visualization before you go in and the night before, just have a good night's sleep. There's a meditation, there's lots of fantastic apps that you can do. And it's practicing, practice. So I've got a few things. I'm going to go through some resources of how you're going to practice. So this other thing here is power posing. So Amy Cuddy's got this great little clip, and that's just a little bit of a clip there, is about this experiment when they did people to do this power posing, Wonder Woman pose. Did that for a minute before they went into a interview or a presentation and they measured their different cortisol levels and stress, all the stress hormones. And what they found is that it made people feel more confident and appear more confident. And they were more confident. All right, so that's another little trick. Resources. We have got so many resources on Career Hub. So please use them. So we've got a fairly new tool. It's called Interview 360. And in there, you can access that from the careers page. And in there, you can go in there and select a graduate interview questions, or if it is for an internship, is it for a teaching interview. We have gone in and designed a number of relevant questions that you can practice with. That records, and then you can listen to yourself. All right, so that's called Interview 360. We've got all our information sheets that are on the Career Hub. Interview preparation. What are you going to wear? How are you going to research? Your interview presentation, your behavioural interview questions talking about the STAR answer. There's also typical questions is another one where we've got a number of pages. If you're a specific, if you're a teacher or nursing, midwifery, those, then we've got specific questions that will help you specifically for that kind of role as well, all in the Career Hub. Interview stream. We've had this for quite a long time now. So again, you can go in, you can put the questions you want to be asked. So you can make up the questions that you think that you're going to be asked from your selection criteria and record yourself. Mock interviews, I'm keeping my eye on the time. I know it's 11 o'clock, so I am going to be finishing up shortly. Mock interviews, I mentioned before, please book mock interviews, at least 2, right? For a graduate role, for an important role. Don't wing it. Do not wing it. So you can see our availability on the Career Hub. On the Career Hub, along the top there, you can click on appointments and then you can click on mock interviews and you'll see the availability. Now, if you can't see a spot where, with enough time before your interview, give us a phone call, all right? Let us know and we will accommodate. We will not mock interview the day of the interview. And that's because if you don't know what STAR is, and if you're really nervous and don't know how to answer typical questions, then having that mock interview is going to mar your performance further. So we won't do it in your best interest. I have to add, it really is for your best interest. You want to do it as soon as you can, and and I know you don't get much notice sometimes, but as soon as you get that call, get on there or reach to us and book in a mock interview and then start practicing. We can send you the tools or direct you to these tools, remind you where they are. With Career Hub, under resources, you can just put in interview and all of the resources that I've mentioned is going to come up and there will be links to different things. So there's a career chat that I did last year about online interviews only for 15 minutes. There's some things on there about teaching interviews, nursing interviews, okay, all recorded. All of the stuff on that will be linked onto that resources area. And that's it for me. Just a reminder for those that don't know that studying and live near Callaghan, we have moved across campus. We're not on the Hunter side. We're over in the Shortland building. We are just above the Subway sandwich shop. You can drop in and see us anytime between 9 and 4:30. Mock interviews you need to book, all right, because we need a space that's going to be comfortable for you. But anything to do with job applications and jobs on campus, those sorts of things, you can drop in. Otherwise, ask a question. Otherwise, give us a phone call. All right, so I really look forward to meeting all of you and helping you with your interview skills or job applications or anything to do with your career and jobs. And also a reminder, for those that are graduating this year, we also provide a free service to all our alumni from the career side. All right, so thank you very much, and thanks, Hugh, for a great opportunity to talk to your UNZA.
Fantastic.
People.
Thank you so much, Tonya. Were there any final questions for Tonya?
Great. Yes, we do mock interviews online. Absolutely. And if it's going to be so, and that's often a great way if you can't get in. We do it at lunchtime if you're working, or we've got people on placement at the moment. We're doing them at lunchtime. If you're doing it via Zoom, then you need to practice on Zoom. But absolutely, we do mock interviews online.
I will just quickly add as well, as I mentioned at the beginning, recordings of this and other workshops will all appear on our UNZA Workshop Recordings YouTube channel, the link to which I've just dropped in. So you're welcome to subscribe there. And over time, you'll see more and more recordings become available.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Hugh.